I forgot what you look like. Okay. Hello, everybody. I forgot to start the thing. Well, we didn't do much. We were just rapping here. Not like literally rapping. I leave that to Dr. Hinsey likes to rap. Have you ever heard him? Yeah, actually, that was better. We were talking about drugs. Okay. But we are looking at Kubla Khan by Coleridge, and we commented on how the subtitle is A Vision in a Dream, a Fragment. And we were saying that the Romantics often can't figure out what state they're in when inspiration falls on them. Are they awake? Are they asleep? Are they in some kind of like zombie? What's the other word? Like trance. That's the word I want. I'm saying zombie-like, but like when you're in a trance and you're kind of awake. And I still think it's freaky that people really do sleepwalk. I mean, you think that's only in movies, but it happens. There are people. Did any of you ever have a friend that actually did sleepwalking? Yeah, I've known a few people whose roommates did it. But some will actually get up and walk around. It's just really, really weird, okay? The Romantics would be fascinated by that. You know how to say sleepwalker in Latin? The proper Latin roots? Yeah, somnambulist. Isn't that a great word? A somnambulist. Somnambulist is Morpheus, the god of sleep, and ambulatory means moving around. So a somnambulist. That's really cool. You ever feel that way, Maria? Are you a somnambulist? Somnambulist? What can you even say? Oh my gosh, it's terrible. Oh my gosh. I remember they used to have commercials for the Army that was getting you to enlist, and it said, we do more before 6 a.m. than most people do all day. And I'm like, is that supposed to get me to want to join the Army? That's going to make me run in the opposite direction as fast as I possibly can. But apparently some people, join the Army because of that. I love seeing the sunrise before I go to bed. Anyway, okay, so we're starting right in with comedy. Anyway, we're going to be more focused. Okay, and by the way, I am going to send an email again. Make sure you get the right copy of Hard Times. I know that's still there. If I remember this weekend, I'll send you an Amazon link just in case you couldn't get it at the store, so we all have the same book, because it was so hard with Frankenstein. I don't blame any of you. That was crazy, but I know there are Hard Times out there. I'm not sure what happened. It was there when I applied, but anyway. Hard times? Oh, yeah, that's right. I had a hard time with. Okay. Oh, man. Okay. Sorry, our brains are working very slowly. I feel it. Anyway. And we also said it's a fragment, okay? And we were saying that back then they didn't know how bad opium was. And this poem is in some ways an opium dream, right? But what's the problem with opium? With any drug, what it will often do, like if you take opium or something like that, it will give you a burst of sort of inspiration. Maybe you'll see all sorts of crazy colors or whatever. But then what happens afterwards? It goes away, and often with drugs, you like drop down into a pit. So you have this burst of inspiration, and then it's not just like you go back to your regular, it's like depression, very good. You're going into a deep pit, and everything's so dark. And that's exactly what happens in this poem. So what I'm saying... Oh, actually, that's a good point. You're right, with sugar. It is a sort of sugar high, and then you collapse. That's true. And this is what I mean when I say I think this poem is finished, but he calls it a fragment because that kind of inspiration can't be sustained. And it ends up putting him in a sort of pit. And as we'll see when we start the next poem, Coleridge knew very much what clinical depression meant. He did suffer from depression. It's very, very clear. Whether he was fully bipolar, he certainly did have, depressive episodes that we'll see. But anyway, he says, in the summer of the year 1797, he goes on, he was reading a book about Kubla Khan, and he quotes it. Here the Khan Kubla commanded a palace to be built and a stately garden thereunto, and thus 10 miles of fertile ground were enclosed with a wall. And the beginning of the poem is very close to the source. Does anybody begin a poem where the beginning is almost exactly a quote from a sermon from the 17th century? You know?
No Man is an Island?
Oh, okay, but it's a poem, though. That's right, that's where For Whom the Bell Tolls gets the title. Oh, I didn't think about that. But, so, okay, what was it? It was a hard, cold winter. Nobody's ever read The Journey of the Magi by T.S. Eliot? Okay, but if you read that one, it actually starts with poetry, but it's almost an exact quote out of a sermon that was written during the same time as John Donne, way back then. Pretty cool. It's a really good poem. It's really his testimony in some ways, coming to faith, as if he were one of the Magi's coming to the Christ child. Great poem. Anyway, okay. So he was reading that, and he says, the author continued for about 3 hours in a profound sleep, at least of the external senses. So already what exactly is this trance-like state that he's in? I don't know if this ever happens to you, but sometimes when I'm really, really tired and like I'll fall asleep and I'll have like a really intense dream, and then I'll wake up and then I can't go to sleep again. And when what's really weird about dreams is that, like, don't they say that they only last like a couple seconds? But it feels like you're having a long dream, but it only, I don't know if we absolutely know that for sure, but it's the rapid eye movement, whatever, but it's sort of weird. It's like, no, I was only asleep for 5 minutes. That dream at least lasted an hour, right? And all of that, they're crazy wrestling with this sort of stuff.
I wake up and then I hit my snooze button and then I'll have like a whole...
Oh, in between the snooze, that's great. So then you know it wasn't very long, 9 or 10 minutes, whatever the snooze was. That snooze button was an evil invention, but we love it. Anyway, he says, during which time he has the most vivid confidence that he could not have composed less than from 200 to 300 lines, if that indeed can be called composition, in which all the images rose up before him as things, with a parallel production of the corresponding expressions without any sensation or consciousness of effort. This is a romantic fantasy, that not only do the images come directly, spontaneously, unmediated, remember all those words, but what else comes with those images? Yeah, the words, right? And that's what they want. See, romantics, and I'm quoting something that Wordsworth wrote, it's actually a piece of prose that he wrote, but very romantic is that they wanted a poetic language that was not like this shirt is to my torso, but that like my body is to my soul. What's the difference between the relation of my clothes and my body as opposed to the relation between my body and my soul? Okay, good. The clothes are just a covering. At night you take them off, you throw them in the hamper or whatever. But does anybody say the word hamper anymore? They just still say that, okay. Anyway, instead of a laundry basket or something. But anyway, well, the laundry basket is different than the hamper, isn't it? You just take it out of the hamper and put it in. Yeah. What's that? That's what you carry the clothes to, yeah. You guys keep it up with your laundry? Are you living in the dorms? Okay, that's good. And the laundry's free here, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a way. The reason they did, well, first of all, I'm sure you're paying for it in your fees, but the reason, you know what the reason they did that? No? Not just ease and all that, not worry about coins. What's that?
Nobody washed their clothes.
But the other reason was to keep students here on the weekends. Because a lot of them would go home or something to wash their clothes or something, and because it's free, it's a way of keeping them on campus. Because, a lot of times their parents still live within an hour or something. But that was smart.
A lot of people just go home anyway.
Oh, they do go, well, but yeah, they're too lazy, even though it's free, they still want, get mom to do it or something. Anyway. So the clothes are just a covering, right? But my body and soul are incarnate, right? It's the body is not just a covering of the soul. The soul expresses itself through the body. We are not, in Christianity, we're not souls trapped in bodies. We're enfleshed souls. All that incarnational language, the two into one. And so what he's saying is, not only do the words come, but just the right words to clothe the images. Very hard to do, right? Some of you know with The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Lewis said, how did that book begin?
With the picture.
Yeah, here we go, the picture, images in his head, right? And then he found the proper genre, which fairy tale, children's story, to clothe them. And that's what he's saying. So this is like the perfect ideal dream. And of course, as you can see, it's Coleridge, so he obviously dreams in iambic pentameter or something like that. I don't know. It's wonderful. But everything's wonderful. And so he says 300 lines. And then, and I wonder if any of you have experienced this horror of what happens then. On awakening, he appeared to himself to a distinct recollection of the whole, and taking his pen, ink, and paper, instantly and eagerly wrote down the lines that are here preserved. At this moment, he was unfortunately called out by a person on business from Porlock and detained by him above an hour, and on his return to his room, found to his no small surprise and mortification that though he still retained some vague and dim recollection of the general purport of the vision, yet, with the exception of some 8 or 10 scattered lines and images, all the rest had passed away, like the images on the surface of a stream into which a stone had been cast, but alas, without the after restoration of the latter. You're in a moment of inspiration, you're writing something, and then that stupid phone rings or the doorbell rings. Oh. Oh, it's true.
And then, like, I'll just think about something else for a minute, and then it's completely gone, and I can't even remember what it was about. I just remember that I did know what it was a minute ago.
And what you do remember, and actually Dante uses this image at the very end of Paradiso after he sees his image of God. He said that basically the memory went even, the image that I saw went even deeper than memory, went all the way down, and it just dissipated like footsteps in the snow, he says, right? Or the scattered leaves of the Sibyl. But what you remember, you probably know this, is the images of your dream pass away quickly, but you remember the emotion for a little longer. Whether you were afraid, or it was beautiful, or happy, or whatever it is, like you can still feel the emotion even as the images slip away. This is what we're talking about. It's the agony and the ecstasy of being a romantic poet. If you're living by inspiration, it's wonderful when the inspiration comes, but when it goes, you can't hold on to it. Right? And that's the angst, wonderful word, A-N-G-S-T, good Germanic word that the romantics like to use. It almost onomatopoeia, angst. Oh, that's true. You put that in there. I love it. we all feel that. Right, you want to kill that person. Why did you stop? I was in a role. But to make you feel better, Frank Capra, the great director, he wrote his autobiography, and he says there about a friend of his who was a screenwriter, and he kept having the most beautiful dreams of the perfect screenplay. And then he would wake up and he would forget it. So he worked hard to find a way to wake himself up, and he left a pad and pencil by his bed so he could write it down really quickly and not forget it. And this is at least what he said. So he woke up, he wrote it down, scribbled it, went back to sleep. When he got up in the morning, he was so excited to see what he wrote. And he picked it up, and you know what it said? Boy meets girl. It wasn't as great as he thought, right? But anyway, that's the story he tells, whether it's true or not. But again, if only we could have an inspiration that gave us vivid images and the language to just purposely cloak it, to make it, again, incarnational. But it goes away. And what's left is the poem. What's that?
The images, the words, and the piece to write it down without being interrupted.
Oh, that's right, yeah. It's all good. It's just, I hate that. So that's what I like about cell phones. You can shut them off. Man, I would have loved that if my old regular phone, I could have shut that off. Great. Yeah, that's true. It is. That is one of the best things about it. Shut it off. Great stuff. I did 3 interviews by phone yesterday. It was very, very high. And I always have to remember when I'm doing a phone interview to shut the ringer off. So that when I'm talking, it doesn't beep. But then I have to watch it and make sure I see it when they call. Because if they call you and when you're talking, maybe I just don't know how to do it. But I can't shut it off because once you're talking, if you push the thing, it just makes your talking voice softer. It doesn't shut off the ringer. There must be a way around that. You know what I mean? Like when you're finally talking, you have your little button there, and this makes the ringer soft or loud. But when you're talking to somebody and you do it, it makes the phone volume soft. So I don't know, once you're talking, if you can then shut off the sound of the ring. Maybe you can. I tried it. Probably should experiment. What's that? You probably could do that. I just have to put it like in speakerphone and talk and go. It's like. That's right. It's a weird thing. Anyway, okay. So this is the fragment that was left over. But as I'm going to show you in a moment, I think it's also about the phony inspiration that something like opium gives, right? There's a famous book, a contemporary of Coleridge named Thomas de Quincey, and he wrote a book called Confessions of an Opium Eater. Isn't that cool? Just instead of opium taker, an opium eater. There's just something cool about that. Not eating the opium, but just I don't know if you feel that. It's the same thing. I know. It was the same way I feel when I read The Tiger with the Y. There's just something cool about it, Opium eater. Who sets a lot of his stories, like in an opium den, right? Sherlock Holmes, there's a lot of opium dens out there. Terrible. Oh, the way that destroyed people back then. Oh my gosh. And that destroyed the Chinese. You know, they call them the Opium Wars. You know, and although I'll tell you, although in no way do I give a pass to the British, but one of the reasons that the British kept selling opium to the Chinese is that the Chinese of 300 years ago are the exact same Chinese of today. They refuse to buy any of our products. They only want to sell us. I mean, seriously, the British had nothing else, so they did it. So this interesting kind of culture clash. It's like, if you just will buy some of our stuff, we can have an equitable trade, but they refuse to buy our goods, or they tariff them to the roof or something like that. It's crazy stuff. Anyway, okay, these famous opening lines: "In Xanadu did Kubla Khan the stately pleasure dome decree, where Alf the sacred river ran through caverns measureless to man, down to a sunless sea." You should at least memorize the first. I have the whole thing memorized, but I'm too tired now to remember it all. But at times I've memorized the whole thing. But there's something so incantatory about that. The way it just sweeps you away, takes you away to this strange, distant, exotic place. Just like where the mariner goes in his journeys, strange, exotic places. I once saw a T-shirt that said, "Join the Marines, visit strange, exotic lands, meet strange, exotic people, and kill them." That's the Marine. That was the funniest thing I ever saw. Anyway, but okay, what's that? That's the Marines. I'm just glad they're on our side. That's basically, I'm just glad they're on our side. Tough guys, man, they're amazing. Anyway, okay, so we begin with this sort of strange, like I said, swept away to these distant places, right? Twice 5 miles of fertile ground with walls and towers were girdled, right? All sorts of things, right? There were gardens bright with sinuous rills, where blossomed many an incense-bearing tree. Here were forests ancient as the hills, enfolding sunny spots of greenery. So it's a sort of strange mishmash of all these different locales and whatnot. And then, and this is what's unique about this poem, there's a break, a space break, and then we move somewhere else, and we're suddenly somewhere else. And then there's another break. This is different than stanzas that you sort of move through the poem. This poem is not only a fragment, it's fragmentary. It's like you have to put the pieces of this poem together because it keeps lurching from one place to another. Now, doesn't that happen in dreams?
Yes.
Can you explain how?
Well, you're going somewhere, or you're like in one location. So for me, I remember having this dream where we were like in this really tall, narrow house. We were like in the house and doing things, and then we were outside walking a dog. And there was no like we went from the house to outside. We were just there, and then like a slideshow or like PowerPoint.
Good. Whatever it is. That's a good way to put it, right? There's no link between the two, right?
No transition.
Yeah, there's no transition there, and everything comes together, and it's okay. Like a good example. Have you ever had this where you are dreaming and like you get up and you're in your dorm room? That might mean it's a nightmare, but anyway, you're dreaming, but then you get up and you're dreaming, right? And you walk over to your window. And you look out the window and you see like your grandmother's house or something. Right? Like in other words, the two don't get it. You're juxtaposing opposite things. And that's one of the things that the imagination does for the romantics. It takes dissimilar things and yokes them together and somehow finds a similarity. So they find similarity in the midst of dissimilarity. Or the way Coleridge said it is they find similitude in the midst of dissimilitude. Just a fancier way of saying it. The yoking together of opposites. It's strange. You gotta read all the different images and put them together. And if you go to a Freudian psychoanalyst and tell your dream, how will they interpret their dream? How will they interpret your dream? They'll have a book that tells them what? Good. This symbol means this means this, all that sort of stuff. What does it mean if you're flying in your dream? Now, of course, if it's a Freudian, if there's anything in your dream that is longer than it is skinny, it's going to be a phallic image. It's going to be what it is, right? Anything that's sort of circular is like a womb image. Everything's sex with those guys. But remember, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, right? But now, what other kind of, I guess it's a kind of literature or a genre, is hard to understand because it uses all sorts of symbolic language that is hard to decipher. We see this in dream imagery. What other kind of imagery do we see it? Where in the Bible do we see that kind of? Yeah, Revelation. Revelation is good prophecy, right? So whether it's the prophetic books of the Old Testament, Isaiah, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, or Revelation of the New Testament, they're very hard to understand because they speak in a dense symbolic language. And sometimes you have to unpack it. So in the Bible, whenever you see like the olive tree or the fig tree, you know what it's usually linked to? Usually linked to Israel. Right, is the fig tree. If you see images of water or wind, that's often a link to the Holy Spirit. There are certain ways of reading these images and assembling them and putting them together. And the language of dreaming is very similar to the language of prophecy. And another reason why prophecy is hard to understand, not only does it have symbols, and not only are those symbols sort of yoked together in strange ways, but another thing that's difficult about prophecy is that the same prophet can be talking about something that's going to happen in a year, and then suddenly it's going to happen when Christ comes, and then suddenly it's going to happen at the second coming. Right? So past, present, and future are all in flux. Now, I know that Abigail just recently read a Greek tragedy that has the same kind of strange, poetic, prophetic dream language. What did you read?
I just we read Sophocles,
Okay, but
the Theban trilogy. We read Aeschylus,
Okay.
We read the Magi.
Can you think of one that's all so difficult to interpret because it has all sorts of dream imagery? It's Agamemnon, the whole Oresteia, especially the Agamemnon. If you ever it's by Aeschylus, it's very difficult because the chorus keeps churning out these weird images that come up again and again. They get interlaced with each other. This is, again, a mixture of dream language and prophetic language, and they're actually very similar. And a lot of times the prophets probably aren't sure whether they dreamed the vision, or it came to them, or they were in some kind of a trance. It's not always understandable, even in the Bible. Right? What happened? Sometimes it seems like they're just taken up. Ezekiel is taken by his hair, taken up to see the new temple, which is really wild. And John is, praying on the Lord's Day, and suddenly the door opens up. Come on up here, buddy! And suddenly he's in the Spirit. He's like, what exactly is happening? And this poem is sort of dealing with that. And it's, can we assemble all the images? And in some ways we can't. Right? But we try to assemble the images. But let's look at one of the most exciting images here. But oh, that deep romantic chasm which slanted down the green hill athwart a cedarn cover, a savage place, as holy and enchanted as air beneath a waning moon, was haunted by woman wailing for her demon lover. Have you ever been to this place? A dream or a nightmare? This strange, primal, primordial place? Oh! Maybe Eliot's not here. She's not here. Sorry, Eliot. Sorry, I forgot she's listening, so we'll get you there. This is like, I'm going to use a phrase that Wordsworth uses in one of his poems. It's like a breathing place. A breathing place of power. This savage, primal, primordial. Like when you were kids that you watched Land of the Lost, all those different things, back where the dinosaurs are from. This sort of strange, prehistoric place. And it's in a place like this where what is born? We talk about something in Blake that might be born out of a primal place like this. You know the word? What is the tiger embody? You know the word? Go on, you can say it. Oric, you remember Oric? Very good. Okay, you remember that just Lord of the Rings is not enough, right? So this is, I'm not saying literally he's thinking about Blake, but this is kind of the place where orchic energy is born. Remember that orchic energy is the energy of inspiration, it's the energy of imagination, it's the energy of revolution. It's all, and this is just like a place where raw energy is born. And look what happens. And from this chasm, with ceaseless turmoil seething, as if this earth in fast, thick hands were breathing, a mighty fountain momently was forced, amid whose swift half-intermittent burst, huge fragments vaulted like rebounding hail, or chaffy grain beneath the thresher's flail. When does a woman breathe in fast, thick pants? When does a woman... Childbirth, okay? Thought I was being dirty to know. Childbirth, okay? Fast, thick, that, when you have what do you call it? Labor pains and breathing in labor pains. I know about this because I watch Call the Midwife. It's like my favorite show. So, you all seen that? Really, the whole thing is on Netflix now. What's that? I did have 2 children too, yes. I know about that too. What I did, I'll show it to my son someday, like when he's getting married. I took videos, so this was like had a big video camera. And Alex ended up being born as a C-section. There was a lot of labor and then a C-section. And so I got, the labor and I'm filming and it's like, put that away. Oh, okay, I'll put it away. And then I spliced it together as best as I could. And so you see her, and then like I go away, and I said, and then I cut to myself, and I'm all dressed up. I say, I am Dr. Marcos. I would like to tell you that after the video stopped, Donna went into whatever 5 hours of labor, after which they decided to do a C-section. And when I walked into the room, I heard the doctor say this, and I cut to the scene from Frankenstein where he says, "It's alive! It's alive! Oh my God, it's alive!" And then I cut to Alex, baby screaming. So it's really wonderful. I put that together somehow. I was very proud of myself. But like an old VHS, but it's great fun. So it's amazing stuff. C-section. So I'm gonna find that and show it to you one of these days. It's great fun. Wait. Good stuff, right? Woo. You should all see the old Frankenstein if you haven't seen it. Boris Karloff. That might even be on YouTube or something. I don't know. Yeah, it's really a great movie.
It's so bad on YouTube.
What's that?
The quality's so bad.
Oh, sometimes it's bad. That's true.
Watch a movie and you're like, this could be anything. It's
Oh, it's that bad. Yeah, some of them are good. Some crazy stuff. Anyway, so childbirth. Okay, that was the point about fasting pants, right? And something's being born out of this primal place. And again, ultimately, it's orc. It's energy. It's pure, unleashed energy coming out. Think of the explosion of an opium dream or something like that. On comes, and then watch what comes. Suddenly, what comes out of it is the fountain, right? And so it comes up, and then it says, "And mid these dancing rocks at once and ever, it flung up momently the sacred river." So the whole river comes up, and then 5 miles meandering with amazing motion through wood and dale, the sacred river ran, then reached the caverns measureless to man, and sank in tumult to a lifeless ocean. You see how?
I was just going to say, I don't know if it's connected or anything. It just reminds me of the Silver Chair, where they're under the
Bism?
and everything. Yes, Bism.
That's
also
right.
Just like the whole place where they have the river and the oceans and
That really is cool, Underland. Woo. We'll get you a Narnia next. You've already had Narnia. Oh, that's right. I keep forgetting you didn't have Narnia. You were the one who's in Narnia, so we'll miss you in your senior year. But you can come visit anyway. Pretend like you're smart. Well, you are smart. Pretend like you know everything, because you already know it, so it's good stuff.
Why does she have to pretend? She already took the class.
I don't know. My thoughts are not quite consecutive today. Anyway. It's just funny. I don't know. I think it's crazy. Anyway. So how is it like, look what happens. It flies up, and then it goes right into the lifeless ocean. You see how it seems very promising, right? And then it goes right down. Now, we've got this burst of orcic energy, goes up and down, and when Kubla, the emperor, whatever, Kubla Khan, when Kubla hears it, he says, "Oh my God, I think it's Mulan." But is it Genghis Khan? I think with Mulan, is that supposed to be Genghis Khan? Who's it supposed to be in Mulan? Is it supposed to be Kubla Khan or Genghis Khan? Who's supposed to be the bad guy in it? It's not but is it tied to the? Is it the Hun? Yeah. Yeah.
It's loosely based on a true
It's supposed to be the Mongols.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking would be the Mongols, but that's Genghis Khan, because the Huns are earlier.
But it didn't say it's the Huns.
I guess they, well, of course. The Huns. But yeah, because like the Huns attacked Rome in the 5th century. The Huns are much earlier.
The Hun was attacking Rome.
Yeah. So it's really early. Don't they show us the Great Wall or something? I think the Great Wall was about the time of the Mongols. Ooh. Anyway, so now watch this. So you've got this burst of whatever creativity, inspiration, but when Kubla hears it, it said, and mid this tumult, Kubla heard from far ancestral voices prophesying war. So what does he hear? Well, what I told you, orc is not only the energy of inspiration and imagination, it's also the energy of destruction, revolution, like the French Revolution. I guess so, yeah. I mean, it's just this power unleashed, and Kubla realizes there's trouble here, right?
Do you think the orcs and Lord of the Rings would have been made to create, like if they were pure evil?
Yeah, they're already perverted things. They, I don't know if they build anything beautiful.
The orcs, their destruction becomes a creation.
Yeah, I guess it would be a converged of things. Getting ready to teach Lord of the Rings to the masters people.
And the rest of us too, right? There's going to be some sort of opportunity.
Oh, there should. I mean, you're a freshman. There should be enough time. You're not going to graduate in 3 years or anything. Okay, good. So just give it time. Everything's up in the air these days. We just got an email saying, just in case we're still like this in the spring, do any of you need to teach remotely? Because there are a few teachers that are remote because of like what's it, Beardman. Some of you know him, Coleridge. Yeah, because I think he's got elderly parents with him, right? Yeah, so there's just a few teachers that are doing remotely, but they're asking already. It's like, I hope that doesn't happen again, but nobody knows. We'll see what happens after the election. That'll be a big deal. What's going to happen after the election? So, okay, then we shift again. The shadow of the dome of pleasure floated midway on the waves, where was heard the mingled measure from the fountains and the caves. It was a miracle of rare device, a stately pleasure dome, a sunny pleasure dome with caves of ice. Already we're yoking together opposites, the sun, the ice. It's this strange, beautiful image out of nowhere, kind of rising up in the poem. Again, this is not typically a way a poem works. Usually you're moving more or less. I mean, sometimes you're moving emotionally, but there's still a logic to the emotion as it develops. Here, and then we cut again. It's another shift to somewhere else, another fragment. A damsel with a dulcimer, which is probably a reference to the Muses. A damsel with a dulcimer in a vision, once I saw it was an Abyssinian maid, and on her dulcimer she played, singing of Mount Abora. Suddenly another image of startling beauty, almost like a strange mirage. By the way, do we have any Ray Bradbury fans here? Ray Bradbury wrote a short story called A Miracle of Rare Device, where these guys see this strange, what do you call that thing? Mirage in the desert and stuff like that. It's kind of cool. Now, could I revive within me her symphony and so the she seems certainly to be the damsel, the muse, right? I see all these things. Now, could I revive within me her symphony and song, to such a deep delight would win me, that with music loud and long I would build that dome in air, that sunny dome, those caves of ice, and all who heard should see them there. If I could revive within me, if I could hold on to that inspiration, what could he do? What would he have the ability to do if he could call back that inspiration and hold on to it? What could he do? Yeah, he could rebuild it, right? Remake the whole thing, and everybody would see it and hear it. He would become, and I'm going to use this phrase a lot in the next couple of weeks, a romantic poet prophet. Because that's what the romantics want to be, poets and prophets, seers. And if he could hold on to that inspiration in its purity, he could do anything. He would be like a god in a way. He could be able to create anything. He could only hold on to the imagination. Now, if we turn for a moment to page 880, this is from Shelley's Defense of Poetry. Just had you made a small clip from this. If I got there, yeah. Where's my silly by? I don't even know what today is. Oh yeah. Okay. I guess I forgot to tell you to read that today. But anyway, you follow along. It's on page 880 because I haven't talked about it yet, but I want you to see it now because it helps. Okay, this is the top of page 880. If you don't have it, you can just listen. This is Shelley writing about the nature of poetry, and he says, "Poetry is not like reasoning, a power to be exerted according to the determination of the will. A man cannot say, 'I will compose poetry.' The greatest poet even cannot say it." What does he mean by that? Why can even the greatest poet not say, "I will compose poetry"? Right. Say the wording. What did you say? Sporadic was the word. Okay. Sporadic inspiration. You have to wait for the inspiration. Good. That's a good way to put it. Now, of course, if Alexander Pope read that, I'd say, "What are you, ridiculous? I'm a poet. I'm a craftsman." Okay. What's her name? Can Eliana's boyfriend say, "I can't make a new sword until inspiration falls on me"? Right? He's a blacksmith. He does it. That's his job. Right? This is what I said. This is a difference with the Romantics. They're no longer a craftsman, although they were very good poets craft-wise. But now they're more like prophets. They have to. Prophets can't sit around and make up prophecies. If they are, they're called a false prophet, and they get stoned to death. Right? They have to wait for it. I like the word you just used. Sporadic. It comes and goes. Right? And now look what he says. Why? He says, "For the mind in creation is as a fading coal." Now, the thing about a coal is when you put it in the fire. Think of wood, but here, remember, the British, everything was coal until fairly recently in England. The thing about coal is it burns and it gives off light and heat. But even as the coal is burning and giving off heat, what is also happening to it? Exactly, it's being consumed. So the whole writing of poetry is like a fading coal because you've got that burst of inspiration, but even as it burns, it is burning out. That's that word angst again, because it's burning out. You can't finish it, right? And, okay, so it says, "For the mind in creation is as a fading coal, which some invisible influence, like an inconstant wind," and that word sporadic used, good, comes and goes, you never know, it's inconstant. "Oh, swear not by the moon, for she is inconstant." Yeah, it's Romeo and Juliet, that's the famous balcony scene. What is she, for she is fickle, what did she have that fickle? Oh, there you go, got it. Like I said, it's easy to make. Everybody likes to make fun of Romeo and Juliet now because it's so stupid. But the poetry is still beautiful. You know.
It's not like being on the high ground, but being
Yeah, that's a good point. I know. Yeah.
That's part of the truth of humanity that Shakespeare could see.
That's right. They can see the same things. You know.
Most people here don't think of the poison themselves and think of their boyfriends. Okay, but we need to.
Well, yeah, I guess.
18 and 20-year-olds.
That's right. They're very young. That's true.
Like 10-year-olds might.
It's sad, but you know. It's interesting. Wait a minute. Now, are you able to feel that compassion for Heathcliff and Kathy?
I haven't read it again, but yes,
You're still good.
compassion for their angst, like in the fact that like Heathcliff is being abused and stuff.
Good.
Feel sad.
That's pretty good. Usually, it's kind of funny to say this, but usually the younger people have less compassion than older people. And the reason is, when you get to my age, you know, you've seen that life is not as easy as you think. You know, when you're young, you know, unless you've had a really bad past, you're like, as long as I do this and this and this, everything will be fine. Everything's reasonable. You can talk, and then you suddenly realize it's not so easy. Yeah, so there we go. That's right. So it is funny, but anyway. So, okay, so like an inconstant wind awakens to transitory brightness. What does transitory mean? Yeah, it moves around. It doesn't last very long. It is linked to the word transit, but it's transitory. It comes and goes. It's gone. Transitory pleasure, we'd say, right? Transitory brightness. This power arises from within, like the color of a flower, which fades and changes as it is developed. And the conscious portions of our nature, in other words, our actual, when we're conscious, aware of something, the conscious portions of our nature are unprophetic either of its approach or its departure. So what are we unable to what's a better word? What are we unable to prophecy foresee or predict? Thank you. That's what I wanted. What are we unable to predict? Either it's what or it's what. Good. So we can't predict when it's going to come, and we can't predict when it's going to leave. So in other words, we can't predict when it's going to come, and when it comes, we can't predict how long it will stay before it leaves. So it's always moving, right? Okay. Now watch this. Could this? Okay, now we've got a if only. Could this influence, the inspiration, could this influence be durable, lasting, in its original purity and force? It is impossible to predict the greatness of the results. Again, if we could hold on to that inspiration in its initial purity and not lose it, we could do anything. We could all be the greatest poets, the greatest novelists, the greatest epic writers that ever lived, right? We could all make masterpieces. We could write the great American novel, right? All that sort of stuff. But it doesn't happen. But when composition begins, inspiration is already on the decline. And the most glorious poetry that has ever been communicated to the world is probably a feeble shadow of the original conception of the poem. Are your poems a lot better in your mind before you write them down? You feel like you've captured, sometimes you feel like you've captured it? Oh, that's true, that's true. Yeah, that's true. Oh, that's right. It looks, oh my, that's just a cliche. I just thought I broke new ground. And it's like, turns out to be Boy Meets Girl. That's how it turns out to be, right? Oldest plot in the world. What's that? That's still a good one, but remember the whole formula is Boy Meets Girl. You know what the whole formula is? Boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy gets girl back again. That's the full formula. And that's also the story of Dante's Divine Comedy. Right? Loses Beatrice, gets her back at the end. And that's the story of the Bible, by the way. Right? Because God has a bride. Well, you've got a compound bride. First it's Israel, then it's the church. Boy meets girl, loses girl. And how does the Bible end? With the great marriage, right? Of Christ and the church. So it's the Bible is not a tragedy. It doesn't end with Armageddon. The Bible is a comedy because it ends with the great marriage of Christ and the church.
Well, like the old, the 1960s Ben-Hur movie that ends instead with they don't have the resurrection. They just end with the crucifixion.
Right.
And I was thinking, but the story's not complete.
That's true. I mean,
It doesn't end like
yeah. I mean, we do see the empty crosses at least. But yeah. But if you want to see it, and you know, well, at least I test my children this time. You know, I'm watching a movie with them. I want to make sure they have the right reaction. And I was very, very proud of my son. Have you ever seen the silent movie version of Ben-Hur? It's a great movie. Probably the best silent movie. But it ends, and they're up on the roof. Ben-Hur, and I think it's Melchior. I think it's the. And anyway, he's looking out at the crosses, and he's sad, right? And the wise man says to him, "Don't worry, he's not dead as long as we remember him." And I didn't say anything. I watched with my son, and as I hoped, when he said he just did the double take it, and I said, "Thank you, I'm glad." That is the worst closing line of any movie ever made. What do you mean? It's like, at least they don't do that bad. Charles Nesson doesn't do that as bad. I mean, but the book is bad. The book is very Christian. But the real Ben-Hur has the great last line though of just before he died, he said, "Forgive them, Father. They don't know what they do." Right? And he says, "I heard a voice." He said, "I heard a voice, and the voice took the sword out of my hand." So it is a powerful Christian thing in that sense. He's trying peace. Yeah, well, the whole kind of group hug, literally at the end. Group hug. Hairball. Remember that? Group hug, hairball. That's the end of Aladdin. Remember the genie? Group hug. And it's like hairball. It's been a while since I watched Aladdin. Anyway, the real one, not the remake, which was fun. Anyway. Okay. Man, I've lost my mind. Okay. Okay, now, if you could hold on to the inspiration, you would be a true romantic poet-prophet. You would be like a god. Anything would be possible. And look what happens back in Kubla Khan. Back to page 466. He gets what he wants. Again, To such a deep delight would win me that with music loud and long I could build that dome in air, that sunny dome, those caves of ice, and all who heard would see them there. This is not where the poem ends. So he gets his romantic fantasy of becoming the romantic poet prophet, but look how it ends. And all who heard should see them there, and all would cry, beware, beware, his flashing eyes, his floating hair. Weave a circle round him thrice, and close your eyes with holy dread, for he on honeydew hath fed, and drunk the milk of paradise. What happens to him? He becomes a poet prophet, but then what happens to him? What does he become?
Terrifying.
Yeah, terrifying. Everybody runs from him. He becomes a contagion to the earth. That's a phrase that Shelley used. He becomes like everybody runs from him, right? He becomes wild. He becomes, what's that? He becomes a Byronic hero in that sense, because in some ways he has tasted of a kind of forbidden knowledge. Maybe it's not for us to channel that inspiration and have it completely. Then we can't go back. Good? That is a good analogy. That's right. It was so glowing. That's right. To cover his face with a veil, and then, there's a Nathaniel Hawthorne story called "The Minister's Veil." Did you ever read that? Plays on that. It's a little less known, but Nathaniel Hawthorne wrote a short story. He's got a lot of good short stories. Young Goodman Brown is probably the best. My Kinsman Major Molyneux is a good one too, though. And he did some that are. What was that one called? Was that him? A Heidegger experiment, Doctor. Oh, anyway, there are lots of really cool things that he did. He did a bunch that were like fantasy elements to them. The Rappaccini's Daughter. You know that one? That's a good one. Anyway, so this is the dark side of romantic inspiration. You want to hold on. You want to be a poet prophet. But if you be careful what you wish for, you may have the misfortune to get it, right? Be careful. Right? What is it? Seek not after pleasure, or you may have the misfortune to find it. Here, again, it's like a forbidden knowledge, and he becomes cut off, an isolated figure, like the ancient mariner, or like Frankenstein, or his monster, cut off from society, unable to go to the marriage feast. I mean, we don't know if the ancient mariner was invited, but they're probably not going to kick him out if he comes, right? But it's like he can't go there. He's gone off into the margins of society. He becomes an outcast, a border figure. He becomes almost mad, possessed, right? The mad poet. Plato sometimes talks about the poet as mad, as being inspired, but inspired with a kind of madness. Plato didn't always trust the madness of inspiration, even though he was the greatest poet ever lived. But yeah. Good old plan. Wow. Okay, let's just get started on the next poem, and then we'll finish it next class. It's page, what's the next page? Is it 483? Yeah, 43. 44, sorry, 44. Got so many. Alrighty. Let's just look at the beginning. Now, dejection and ode. Did we read anything else? Ode in it? Yeah, Wordsworth. Intimation there, right? I remember that. Intimations of mortality from recollections of early childhood. I love that. Remember the intimations? Oh, it's called Dejection and Ode by Coleridge. Dejection, and ode. So this is an ode, and one of the things about odes, they were invented by the Greeks, a guy named Pindar, and generally speaking, now, Keats is going to play with this, but generally speaking, in an ode, you don't have a set stanza form. Each stanza, there are stanzas, but notice they get longer and shorter, and the same thing happened in the Intimations ode, because in an ode, you're working through something. Often, if it's a romantic, a crisis, but this is a crisis poem as well. And you're to capture the movement of your emotion and your state, each stanza is a little bit different. Now, when we get to Grecian Urn and Nightingale, those are famous because Keats, maybe because he knew that the feelings were so strong, he wanted to capture them more, and so he uses a set stanza. But generally speaking, odes are all different lengths, because we're moving. In fact, there's a fancy word, if you want to really impress your teachers. Technically speaking, in an ode, we don't call it a stanza, we call it a strophe. Basically, the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock. Technically, we would call those strophes. Strophe means a turn, like a catastrophe is a downturn, catastrophe. Because it's a turning and a moving of the emotion.
Those are Greek plays that we were just reading.
Yes.
Sophocles and Aeschylus, they had strophes and
Right, antistrophe usually, and it means the turn and the counter. Now, literally, the chorus is dancing, not dancing, but moving, rhythmic moving, or something like that. It literally means that, but here it also means the turn of it. So you're right. They are, in a sense, those are odes that intersperse, especially Sophocles, that intersperse Sophocles' plays. So again, those are forms that go back. Ode actually just means song in Greek, literally. But so we're fine now. Remember I told you that the Intimations Ode was written in two sections? First, he wrote segments 1 to 4, stanzas 1 to 4. Then he dropped it, put it down for 2 years, and then he wrote the others. This poem was written in between, because Wordsworth read out loud the Intimations Ode, stanzas 1 to 4, to Coleridge. Just like the Inklings, they always read things out loud to each other. That's how they did it. Maybe that's just a British thing, I don't know. But anyway, that's the way they did it to each other. And this is his version of a crisis poem, an ode, and it's got similarities. We won't have time to go through all of it, but by the end. But it starts with, and again, this is another first. I don't know any other poem that does this. Maybe Maria can think of one. He begins with a little epigraph from a medieval ballad. Late, late yestreen I saw the new moon with the old moon in her arms, and I fear, my master dear, we shall have a deadly storm. So he finds a ballad from the Middle Ages that has almost a psychological content to it, a suggestion that the upper world and the lower world are in sync, a little bit of that externalization of the internal, right? Why I say that's weird is that his poem begins as a commentary on the epigraph. I haven't seen that. There must be another poem. I've never seen one. It's kind of a cool idea. Maria, that's your next project. Or can you think of one? Yeah, that's true, yeah. Oh, that's right, he does. That's right. If I had any notion that this story would be taken back, I would never tell you. And then he goes on, that's a weird way to start a love poem. Is it a love poem that you don't want anybody to hear? You're right, it doesn't, there's a link to it. But he actually says, well, which is also a very strange way to begin a poem. Well, if the bard was weatherwise, he means the guy who wrote the ballad. It was anonymous, of course. The bard, anonymous, that guy wrote a lot of great stuff in the Middle Ages. Really amazing. Anyway, if the bard was weatherwise, who made the grand old ballad of Sir Patrick Spence, this night so tranquil now will not go hence, unroused by winds that ply a busier trade. What he's saying is, if that guy was right about this, I think a storm is coming. But right now, things are gentle. The storm will come later in the poem. And he says, now watch this, then those which mold yon cloud in lazy flakes, or the dull sobbing draught that moans and rakes upon the strings of this Aeolian lute. God, I just introduced my sophomores to the Aeolos in the Odyssey, right? Aeolos is who? The god? God of the wind. It's in the Odyssey. Remember Aeolos? He's the one that gives the bag of wind to Odysseus. And so an Aeolian harp is a wind harp. Have you ever seen this? It's like a little harp, and it's got the strings, but then there are strings with little balls attached to them. And when the wind blows it, it plays. So the wind is playing the harp. Now, actually, you're right. Wind chimes would be the same thing. That's good. Oh, and they have the. Did you see the wind chimes, Sophia, at the Renaissance Festival? They got a store that has the most expensive, most beautiful wind chimes you've ever seen. Amazing. Those are cool. Anyway, so. Why would the Romantics, almost every Romantic writes about an Aeolian harp somewhere. Coleridge actually wrote a poem called The Aeolian Harp. What would the Aeolian harp be a perfect metaphor for if you're a Romantic poet? Good. See, the romantic poet is to inspiration as the harp is to the wind. So they are passive to inspiration. They wait for it to come and blow over them. So the image of alien harps comes up a lot in romantic poetry. It's their favorite toy, okay? But everything's beautiful around, but look what he says. Those sounds, let me see, line 16, those sounds which oft have raised me while they awed and sent my soul abroad. In the past, whenever I saw nature like this and the breeze, it always inspired and restored me, but might now perhaps their wonted impulse give, might startle this dull pain and make it move and live. So, just like Wordsworth is in the midst of beauty, but it's no longer speaking to him, he no longer sees that corona around the sun, he's saying that what used to restore and rejuvenate me, I don't feel anything anymore. I've lost my connection with nature. And that's going to cause a crisis if you're a romantic poet. And then he says, a grief without a pang, void, dark, and drear, a stifled, drowsy, unimpassioned grief that finds no natural outlet, no relief in word or sigh or tear. Okay, well, we'll end with this here. What is the difference between depression and clinical depression? Everybody gets at least depressed at one time in their life. What makes it clinical depression? Maybe you suffered it yourself or knew somebody. I mean, often there is some kind of chemical imbalance that oftentimes you need some kind of drug. See, everybody gets depressed, but when you're clinically depressed, it is like you are in a pit. Nothing you do can get you out of it. You only dig yourself deeper. It lasts a long time. Good. Good. You can't. I mean, in other words, like if you normally think of somebody depressed, you might think of them crying and crying and crying. But when you've got clinical depression, it's more of a deadness inside. It would actually help if you could cry, but it's like good. And this reads like a textbook definition of clinical depression. That's why I said it's clear that Coleridge had that. This is more. And you see it in his other poetry. It is. He's in the pit and he can't get out of it. This is a much deeper crisis than Wordsworth never had that kind of depression, as far as we can see, certainly by looking at his poetry. But Coleridge, again, it was harder for him. He knew the depth of that kind of depression, and the rest of the crisis poem was going to help relieve that. Right?
So if you're depressed, it's like your external circumstances are affecting your internal state of being. But if you're clinically depressed, then your internal state of being is affecting your...
Oh, excellent. You looked ahead. We'll look at that next time. But there is a passage we'll get to later that I call the externalization of the internal with a vengeance. Just to get you thinking ahead for Thursday. Okay, normally if you're a romantic poet, you're inspired by nature and rejuvenated. But if you're dead on the inside, you're going to end up projecting that deadness onto nature. And so nature cannot help you. Right? So externalization of the internal is a wonderful thing when you're joyous and happy inside and you're projecting life and joy onto the world. But if you're completely dead inside and you project that, you're almost making the world even deader than it is. When I get to these people, it's the dark side now. There's a good side to romanticism and a dark side. This is the dark side of externalization of the internal. Just like we saw the dark side of being a poet-prophet. Good stuff. So you know your stuff. Very good. We will finish that poem, and then we'll look at a little bit at probably the first Shelley poem we'll look at. So good job, folks.